Welcome to Powerhouse Arts. And my name is Richard Hanley. I'm the director of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, and we are pleased to be hosted today by Powerhouse Arts. And we are going to hear the story and the updates and the future of this very interesting building slash vision slash project. We're going to have 4 speakers today, and we are going to have Nathan Kensinger, Senior Fellow of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, who's going to both be a speaker and our moderator for this panel. Afterwards, we'll get a tour of the building and we'll see what they have done and what they still plan to do. So first is Nathan Kensinger, an artist, journalist based in Brooklyn, where he explores hidden urban landscapes, post-industrial ecologies, forgotten waterways, environmental contamination, and coastal communities endangered by sea level rise and climate change. So what Nathan has been doing has been examining, photographing, and filming places very much like this one, and he has actually written about this place several years ago. So he is really well positioned to first be the first speaker and then to have the moderating duties of the panel. So without further ado, I introduce Nathan.
Thanks, Clifford.
One second. As long as we can get everyone on the screen and at the Zoom, then the panelists, you could sit where you're comfortable. You don't have to stand here. I just did it so everyone would have a seat. So.
Thank you, Richard. Oh, we got 2 microphones. I'm Nathan Kensinger. I'm so happy to see everyone here today and excited about our panel. I'm just going to give a little, hopefully not too long talk about sort of the context of the building that we're in today. But I was curious, how many people have visited the Powerhouse Arts Center before? Just a show of hands here. Oh, really? Okay, so only about 5 people. That's great. The building's been open for about a year. It's almost been a year to the day. I was just seeing 1 year ago, I wrote a piece about kind of the grand opening weekend that took place here. So I'm excited to be back after a year and also to be sharing it with all of you. So I'm going to talk a little bit before introducing our panelists, a bit about kind of the more recent history of the building that we're in today. As Richard said, I'm Nathan Kensinger. I've been engaging New York City's waterfront for the last 20 years in a whole series of films and photo essays and public art projects. And as part of that, I would say, you know, my work really began here in this neighborhood. I lived about 3 blocks away from the Gowanus Canal when I first moved to New York City 20 years ago. And this is really what it looked like when I moved here. This is looking at what is now the Whole Foods market at the corner of 3rd and 3rd. And so the neighborhood was very different in that time. It was a very kind of wild post-industrial space with abandoned buildings, empty lots that had turned into wetlands. What we're looking at here is a wetlands growing in this empty space that used to be a concrete factory. And in the distance behind it is the Powerhouse building, as it was in, I guess this is about 2007 or 2010 that I took this photograph. And it was a very different era in the Gowanus Canal. There was just sort of a fascinating, the fascinating remnants of the past everywhere about you. The Burns Brothers coal pockets here, the Kentau floor sign in the distance, graffiti artists kind of having their way around the buildings and empty lots. And of course, the canal itself being a playground for groups like the Gowanus Dredgers and other adventurers. And really, this was not that long ago. I mean, this was like, let's say like a decade or 15 years ago that the neighborhood was in this industrial and post-industrial state, which if you haven't had a chance to see the neighborhood now, it's much, much different. So I started writing about the neighborhood and writing about my experiences, exploring around the Gowanus and Red Hook and the waterfront. This is a piece I wrote in 2011 called Gowanus Canal Toxic Playground, which was for a talk that I gave at a space called Cabinet Space, which was near a gallery called Proteus Gowanus. There was tons of arts groups and artists that were in the area. As you can see, Gowanus Canal, super fun, super fun. And this is the description that I gave as part of this talk. For the past several decades, the Gowanus Canal has been a center of unrestricted creativity in Brooklyn. With seemingly few rules or regulations, the canal area became a source of inspiration to numerous artists, filmmakers, and photographers. Bohemian communities developed on its waters, including a houseboat armada and the now defunct Batcave, which is another name for the building we're in today. The empty lots were once described as Brooklyn's biggest toxic playground by Robert Goosekind and were taken over by graffiti artists, sculptors, and homeless camps. Arts groups and gallery spaces, including rooftop films and issue project room, found homes in its industrial buildings. Creative projects like the dumpster pools were installed on its banks, while community groups like the Gowanus Dredgers organized access to its waters. So it's a very interesting time to be exploring the waterfront of the Gowanus and really the whole Brooklyn waterfront as it transitioned away from this industrial era towards some different future where the old industrial buildings were repurposed or torn down in many cases, and residential buildings were built in these same industrial spaces. This is a description of my experience, but for the past 8 years, the Gowanus Canal was my backyard. Given this is written in 2011, so 8 years from 2011. I boated in its waters with an inflatable boat found in a trash can. I swam in the dumpster pools and went to parties on its houseboats, canoed with the Gowanus Dredgers, and explored the many abandoned buildings and empty lots on its shores. The Gowanus was an early inspiration for my photographs of New York's industrial waterfront, and I assisted many other filmmakers, journalists, photographers in their creative pursuits along the canal. And that's what brought me to this building, which at the time I knew of as the Batcave. Yes. So anyway, how many people are familiar with the Batcave as a name? Oh, great. So the building that we're in now, Powerhouse Arts, at the time was known as the Batcave. And at the time I first visited it in about 2007, it was going through a period of transition. The building itself had long been abandoned for many decades. The roof was missing, the windows were busted out. And they had just, basically, the previous landlords had just evicted a famous squat there known as the Batcave, where people were living in the building for many years. And so the building was kind of emptied out of people, but not emptied out of the things inside. When I first entered the building, it was very dark. There was, almost pitch black on certain floors, the lower floors. But there was a bicycle shop in place. There were, tools left there. People had left their belongings behind after the eviction. And as I got to the upper floors, I still remember this like physical response I had because we sort of were creeping through this dark building. We didn't know what we were going to find. I'd never really seen any photographs of the building before that I was aware of. I just heard stories of it as the Batcave, this kind of wild squat. And we came to the upper floors, and I just remember this palpable feeling of what did I just stumble across here in this space, this grand sweeping hall that was covered in graffiti from like head to toe, ceiling missing, flooded, plants growing in it, but really you could see this amazing space, this just amazing open area that was a complete surprise. I mean, I remember you never know what you're going to find when you go inside of an abandoned building. And this was one where I was just completely like, holy cow, like what have we found here? So these are some of the photos from 2007 and 2010 that I took of the building in that state at that time. As you can see, covered in amazing graffiti murals. Bedrooms still left in place. The eviction was rather sudden, so there was mattresses and belongings left behind where people had set up their bedrooms. People left behind posters, medication, clothes. It seems like there was a rather sudden eviction that took place with the previous landlord. And the history intrigued me, but I didn't know what it was until really last year, it was the first time I was able to kind of dig into what the history of that Batcave era was like. And at the opening of the Powerhouse, I met one of the people, Ellery Neon, who's an artist who helped found the Batcave squat. And I interviewed him and wrote a little about his story and his relationship with the building. But this is what he said. He said, in 2002, I was 17 and I kind of ran away from home and ended up looking for somewhere. I found the building and me and my friend moved in and we called it the Batcave. It was a pretty successful community for a while. Neon lived there until 2004, so 2 years, by which time the commune had grown to 30 squatters. They made a home inside the crumbling, leaking building without heat, water, or electricity, fending off wild dogs, tapping a nearby drawbridge for power, and running a bike repair shop. After Neon left, the squatter community devolved into heroin and violence, and the residents were evicted in 2006 by the building's previous owners. But Neon returned to host parties and paint massive messages across the rooftop, such as "No more corporate bullshit" and "End, stop, and frisk." According to Neon, those graffiti pieces were what drew the owner of the current owner of the building to purchase the building in 2012 for $7 million. So the building had this aura and this history of this wild creative space, and that has in some ways been preserved today. I mean, you'll see it on the tour. Like some of Ellery Neon's graffiti pieces are still in the building. He came to the opening and painted a massive new mural on the wall and gave out prints as part of the opening. So the history of the Batcave era is related to what we're going to see today. But of course, we'll hear from our panelists today, the building has a much longer history, going into its past as a powerhouse for the Brooklyn Rapid Transit system. And that's what it looked like prior to becoming this kind of crazy abandoned space and now the Powerhouse Arts space. So we'll hear from our panelists about that. We'll hear a bit about the context of the Gowanus Canal, the history of like how the Gowanus became this industrial powerhouse. I mean, industrial center. And you can still see remnants around the Gowanus of these industrial buildings. Some of them have been landmarked. These are some of the older landmarks. This is the Coignet Stone Building, which is on the corner of 3rd and 3rd, now surrounded by Whole Foods. You saw it in my first photo when it was kind of decrepit. Now it's been restored and has been for sale for quite a while. This is a New York City landmark that was built as a showcase for what you could do with cast concrete, poured concrete, one or the other. The Carroll Street Bridge, of course, a great New York City landmark, one of my favorite bridges up until they built the giant tower next to it. But a lot of the industrial past on the Gowanus Canal has been erased. These are some of the structures that have gone. Kentel Flores sign, gone into storage somewhere. The Burns Brothers coal pockets, gone. This is looking at them from the new esplanade of the Whole Foods, which has taken up that empty lot that was in one of my first photographs. And so some groups have come together and really tried to say, like, what can be saved here? You know, is there anything we can save on the Gowanus? Because the history of the Gowanus is a pretty important piece of why Brooklyn became Brooklyn. So I wrote this piece in 2018 when a group of neighborhood advocates came together to try and advocate for some measure of the neighborhood to be saved in the face of the massive rezoning that was coming our way. And they managed to bring to the attention of the Landmarks Commission the whole list of buildings, and 5 of them were landmarked. This is also on the corner of 3rd and 3rd, the I think American Can Factory, the ASPCA building, which is at the head of the canal, is on the left. The National Packing Factory on the right is on the corner of Union and the canal. And these are some of the 5 buildings that were preserved and protected. So there will be some bit of the industrial fabric of the Gowanus Canal saved going into the future as this massive, system of towers is put in place around them. But many other buildings were lost. We lost the Gowanus pumping station on the left. That's been demolished. On the right, the Green Building, where many people have celebrated weddings and birthdays and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. That building has been demolished. So we're seeing a pretty rapid era of change on the Gowanus, where these really historic, often beautiful industrial buildings have been largely demolished. This is the Bown storehouse, which was an amazing 1800s structure that stood south of the Hamilton Avenue Bridge. And the interior was just this amazing forest of wooden timbers again, kind of covered by graffiti, but in very good shape up until it burned mysteriously and then was demolished before it could be landmarked. So now it's a huge open lot awaiting development. So taken in that context, to me, it's kind of a wonder. It's an amazing thing that this building we're in today still stands and is this monument that kind of talks about the history of why the Gowanus is the Gowanus, how Brooklyn came to be Brooklyn, and that it's not been transformed into, luxury condominium towers is also amazing, that it's been turned into some creative art space. And we're going to hear about that from our panelists. Like how exactly do you go from this decrepit, abandoned bat cave filled with heroin needles and graffiti and missing roof into a building that honors all of its stages of history, and is also a community resource. I don't think I'll read all of this. This is some of what I wrote, but we'll probably hear from our panelists about this. This is what I wrote at the opening last year, though. For decades, a derelict powerhouse loomed over the banks of Brooklyn's toxic Gowanus Canal, its mysterious halls hidden away and accessed only by intrepid teenage squatters, graffiti artists, and urban explorers. And now the doors to this historic structure, once known as the Batcave, have opened to the public with the official launch of Powerhouse Arts on May 19th of last year. So we'll hear from our presenters today just how that happened, like how we got to this place today. And then we're going to take a tour of the facilities and kind of see, how it has transformed from this kind of pretty terrible derelict condition into a very useful facility today. This is the slide I was looking for, some of the before and after, just to give you a bit of context of like what it looked like a decade ago and what it's been transformed into today. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and hear from them a bit more about the history of Powerhouse Arts. I'm really excited to have you describe to the audience what the process was for bringing this building back to life, and really excited to have everyone see the building too on our tour. I have to read everyone's bios. I'm not sure if, do I advance to the next slide? Maybe I do. Let's see. No, maybe it's a different presentation. I'm going to give a short description from some of the bios today, but Victoria Cuddy is an associate at PBDW Architects, where she has worked since 2011 and proven her leadership on increasingly complex projects, finding a special expertise within new designs and adaptive reuse projects. Most recently, she served as the project manager for the adaptive reuse of the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Power Station for Powerhouse Arts, which is the facility we're in today. She's also worked for many years with the Park Avenue Armory on the restoration and adaptive reuse of this city and national landmark to create a cultural and performing arts venue. She is the, let's see here. She currently serves on the board of directors for the AIAWHV. Yeah, what is it? Westchester Hudson Valley. And received her Bachelor of Arts from Amherst College and her Master's of Architecture from Parsons New School for Design. So welcome. Our second speaker, I'm not sure if this will be the order or not, but one of our speakers will be Paul Parkhill, who has served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Gemini Arts Initiative, which is the development subsidiary of Powerhouse Arts since 2018. He's an urban planner with more than 30 years of experience in community development, with a focus on developing spaces for arts and industry. Parkhill founded Parkhill Planning and Development, PPD, which is a community development consulting firm, in 2016, and has worked with clients in all 5 boroughs of NYC and across the country. He previously served as the founding executive director of Spaceworks NYC, which is a citywide nonprofit organization that developed and managed affordable and long-term workspaces for visual and performing artists, and also as the Director of Planning and Development at the Greenpoint Manufacturing and Design Center, which is another great industrial building that's been repurposed into different ways. Parkle holds a BA from Brown University and a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia University. Welcome. And our third speaker will be Karen Williams, who's the newly appointed vice president of Powerhouse Arts. So congratulations on your new position. Previously, Karen was the program director at the Design Trust for Public Space. She possesses a deep commitment to the urban landscape and is an accomplished urban planner and landscape designer who is driven by a keen awareness of the socio-political forces intricately woven into the fabric of our built and natural environments. As an urban planner and landscape designer, Williams' professional passion is evident in her dedication to crafting programs that transcend traditional boundaries and foster a renewed sense of public understanding of design, planning, and public policy. She earned a master's degree in urban planning from McGill University and landscape architecture from the University of Toronto, which was preceded by a Bachelor of Arts degree in international development studies at Trent University. So welcome. And I'll leave it to our three presenters to give us sort of an overview of this building we're in today.
Thanks so much, Nathan. All right, so we're going to shift presentations. So again, my name is Paul Parkhill. I am the CEO of Gemini Arts, which is a subsidiary entity that developed the building, kind of oversaw the construction process. I'm going to give an overview of the history of the building and to some extent of the Gowanus Canal, and then I'm going to pass it to Tori, who's going to talk about design and construction, and then Karen is going to talk about kind of ongoing programming. So I wanted to spend a minute talking a little bit more formally about the history of the canal itself, because the history of the building is so wrapped up in the history of the canal, as Nathan was kind of indicating. The original canal was actually called Gowanus Creek. It was named after a Canarsie sachem called Gowani. I think it's appropriate to do to recognize that we're on Lenape land and that this is, this is part of the kind of integral history of the canal. So it was farmland. It was pretty rural, a pretty rural environment. The creek was known for its dinner plate sized oysters, among other things. We don't know if that's an apocryphal story or not because we weren't there, but it was definitely an oyster hotbed. Around 1849, the New York State Legislature authorized the deepening of the creek for canal purposes, and Edwin Litchfield, who was the developer of most of the neighborhoods around here, was put in charge of creating or kind of regularizing a canal, an industrial canal, building the bulkheads. So the canal itself is about 100 feet wide throughout, and really facilitated kind of the explosion of industry on the canal, which was one of the busiest industrial waterways in the country, if not the world. The Gowanus and Newtown Creek, I think, sort of rivaled each other for kind of busiest industrial waterway. It was, I mean, I can just run through some of these slides, but it was quite busy. There were hundreds of barges and other industrial vehicles kind of patrolling the canal at all times. It became a center for all kinds of industry, all of which was pretty toxic. So there were dozens of coal refineries. There was a manufactured gas plant, actually a renowned one or infamous one at what's called the public place site now, which is designated for affordable housing across the canal. Rendering, tallow rendering, et cetera, and became known as Lavender Lake at some point as a result of all of the industrial effluents that went into the canal, early communication systems for navigation. And this is actually the original Union Street Bridge. So this is the first one in which you can actually see the powerhouse in the background, or what was at the time the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Central Power Station. These were decorative gardens that were created around the Carroll Street Bridge. All right, so that brings us to the powerhouse itself. It was this site that we're on, I don't know how well you can see it, but it was originally a sulfur works. But by 1904, so this is 1886, by 1904, it had been built out as the central power station for the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company. the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company was a precursor to the Brooklyn Manhattan Transit Company, which was one of the 3 private entities that were eventually turned into the New York City subway system. It ran all of the trolleys, all of the above ground elevated lines, as well as the kind of burgeoning subway system. The building was designed by Thomas Murray, who's the guy on our right. Here's his picture with Thomas Edison. So clearly an important guy. The building was designed in a Romanesque revival style. It was kind of a testament to just how important I think people thought industrial infrastructure was during the day. So it was a utilitarian building, but kind of not designed as such. And there were 2 sections, and Tori can go into probably excruciating detail about all of this. But so the original boiler house on your right with the chimneys was where the steam turbines were, and then the turbine hall to your left, which is the building that we're in right now, were built together. It was, I put in a bunch of these graphics just for fun. I cannot describe to you exactly what the engineering process was, but there were big dynamos in the turbine hall, and then about 32 steam furnaces in the boiler house. So just some graphics, some images from the original building. And then, all right, so the construction of the site itself involved the creation. I'm going to actually go to the next slide. So you can see there was about a 7-foot or 8-foot mat slab under each of these buildings that was supported by hundreds of wooden piles. And so just, yeah. 1 mat slab. We had to do 2 load tests for a single mat slab. So this gives you some sense of sort of the crazy network of piles that are under the building still, because we used the existing mat slab when we built the building. Yeah, and you can see the horse-drawn carriages. So it was it was a pretty primitive construction system. Obviously, the whole plant was fired by coal, and so there were a variety of trestles and conveyors that were used to get the coal into the boiler house. This is obviously a huge heap of coal just sitting along 3rd Avenue, and this gives you some sense of sort of the infrastructure that was along the canal, so that barges bringing coal could actually pull it into the boiler house in order to be burned for steam. Some other shots of the project. Again, the turbine hall dynamos. This is actually a shot from later on. So after the power plant functioned for roughly 40 years, the boiler house was retired. The turbine hall continued to generate power, but they tore down the boiler house, and so the building that we inherited was just the turbine hall, the building that you're in. The mat slab again was still there. We assume that the demolished boiler house ended up in what was the First Street turning basin, and will be again the First Street turning basin. But there was a waterway to the north of this building prior to the demolition of the boiler house. This is a shot from the 60s, kind of showing kind of what was left of the operation. And you've seen some of these photographs. I'm going to mention a couple other things related to the environmental legacy. So we were fortunate enough to have the previous owners enroll the building in the Brownfield Cleanup Program, which is a New York State DEC program that made us eligible for tax credits. And so we were actually enrolled in kind of the first generation of tax credits, which were the most generous, which is great. Because the canal itself in the interim became a Superfund site, and the cleanup and dredging of the canal began, during the remediation process, we were managed both by DEC and by EPA, and so there was a lot of kind of back and forth. There was also a very extensive cleanup of the site itself. It had been kind of renowned as the dumping ground for contractor debris and tires and kind of everything else. So any waste that you had was brought here to be dumped on the site. And so we had to excavate all of that and cap the site. There were obviously PCBs from the original power generation process. The one interesting tidbit, which is related to the first time I was in the building, which was in the late 90s when I was working with the Fifth Avenue Committee in GMDC to look at a sort of art space potentially. It had been the slabs that were there, and these are all new slabs, but the original slabs that are there and that are shown in this picture had been poured by the Hasidic owners of the building who were thinking that they were going to open a wedding hall. And so there had been, and so when we visited, there was a kind of like a little reception area off what's now the forecourt that you'd walk in. And it was supposed to be to sort of sell potential clients on, having their wedding here. Unfortunately, they poured slabs that were completely structurally unsound. And so it's very fortunate that none of that ever happened because it would have been a nightmare. These are some of the other conditions that we found. This is actually a little bit into the project already because we had started demoing the slabs. And this just gives you a sense of sort of where the boiler house used to be. And so this is the turbine hall. And so, where the mat slab was, some other shots. All right, and so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tori, who's going to walk you through the next stage. And I don't know if we want to do questions. It was demolished. Sorry, it was demolished in the 50s. So it was decommissioned in 1938. I don't actually know the full history of why they converted. I guess it was no longer a steam powered generation plant. I guess they figured out another way to power it. So, and then I guess they tore down the building because it was no longer functioning, and they needed to throw something in the turning basin. I don't know. So, but maybe you. Oh, sorry. So it was, yeah, sorry. It was for the Brooklyn Rapid Transit system. So it was for all the subway, the elevated trains, the trolleys. There were other Con Ed generating plants that were, yeah. So this was specifically for the trains. Yeah. And oh, I'm sorry. Great question. I have no idea. I mean, I assume it came, yeah, that's probably the route, but I'm sure it came from many different places. So, and just one other tidbit about the Dodgers. So the original Washington Field was actually directly across 3rd Avenue. So the wall you see is actually a remnant of the first stadium that the Dodgers played in. So they were the Gowanus Dodgers for a while. Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Tori Cuddy. I was the project manager for PBDW on this project. We were the executive architects and preservation architects for the Powerhouse project, but we worked in collaboration with Herzog and Demron, who are the design consultants as well. So we were working hand in hand with them. The project, oh, this is not the right slideshow, but that's okay. So we were brought into the project in 2016 through a design competition. And when we came onto the site, as you could see from the earlier photos, we had, it was graffiti everywhere. The roof had been removed from the turbine hall to stop some of the deterioration that had happened. Water had been leaking into the building. There was a lot of biological growth, vines and weeds climbing up through the bricks of the exterior facade. Bricks had been peeling off of the parapet, falling off of the parapet. There were serious cracks and deterioration of the building. So we came onto the project and there was ongoing remediation happening, as well as these sort of remnants of decay that had been occurring over time. This is actually a photo taken during construction, which is kind of a unique moment in time, because when we came in, as Paul had mentioned, there had been these infill floors. Is there like a pointer? No, okay. There had been these inlaid floors that sat on top of these mezzanines around the perimeter. And so you had sort of a similar experience to what you have right now in the space. And during demolition, they pulled all those floors as illegal, non-structural, highly unsafe floors out of the building. And you, for the first moment in time, returned to what the building had historically been, where it was this open shell really to house these turbines, with the mezzanines wrapping around the perimeter for the ongoing maintenance. And so it was just this window that lasted a couple of weeks before we infilled with the new concrete, where you could see what this original building had looked like and have that experience. As Paul had mentioned when we came in, so we were looking at what the partie for the building should be. It feels, sorry. I'm just, okay. I'm going to speak a little bit with the slides, but also without the slides, because the slideshow is not quite what we had finalized. So because there's all this contamination on the site, we had made a decision early on that we didn't want to break through the cap that had been put in place on the site once that cleanup had happened. And so that really determined a lot in terms of how we were thinking about building out the building to meet the requirements for this new organization. We knew it was going to be an institution for the creation of large-scale works of art across 5 mediums. So we were looking at metal, wood, printmaking, and textiles. And we knew that to do that, we had the turbine hall, but we also needed to build an addition to that building in some format. We looked at doing additional buildings around the site. We looked at expanding the turbine hall. We really explored and vetted several different opportunities, but in large part because we didn't want to extend our remediation scope, we decided to really maintain the footprint of the historic building and use the existing foundations, the existing mat slab, to build this addition. So we kept the turbine hall, we restored it, we infilled with new floors, and then we built an addition, which is the boiler house building. We're keeping the same historic terminology for the 2 structures. We built an addition directly to the north of this building. That's a new cast-in-place concrete 6-story facility that houses actually most of the workshop spaces. And so because we were using the original mat slab foundation, that also prescribed a little bit what the massing would be, the size and massing, because we had to meet the same load requirements of the original structure. So the new building very closely aligns with what the historic building had been in terms of massing and siting on the site. What that also meant was we needed to prove to the Department of Buildings that this mat slab could support the new proposed load for the new addition and the turbine hall, because there wasn't an engineer designing the foundations. We were building off an existing condition. So we worked with Langen Engineering, Robert Silman, our structural engineer, Rue, our environmental engineer, to develop a load test, which basically meant that on the footprint of both the new boiler house and the turbine hall, we piled up 2 times the proposed load of the new building. And we did this over a period of weeks where we 25% of the soil went up, then 50, 75, and we had vibration and optical monitors throughout to see if there was any movement. And then we removed the soil in the same stepped fashion, and then brought it to the other side and did the same thing. So we repeated it twice. This took about 9 months to do, but it enabled us to keep the footprint contained and to prove to DOB that, I mean, fortunately they accepted it, that this would suffice. So what you're seeing here, we had removed the first floor slab, we'd put in some additional shoring and bracing in the turbine hall, and this is, I don't know, probably like 50 to 75%, maybe 75% of the soil had been loaded in the basement of the turbine hall. You can see the monitors in the turquoise casings here. That is a good question. That was actually a large part of the complications for this. We were working in CDs. We were doing our documentation, doing our drawings for the project while the load test was ongoing. And there were months during which soil was moved from one pile on the site to another pile, trying to find places for it. And then we had to find places across the country that were willing to accept the soil that had been on this contaminated site. And so that really is what drove the time frame for this 9-month load test. It went to Tennessee, it went to Pennsylvania, it went to, I mean, you could probably speak more to that, where it all ended up. Now, it wasn't contaminated, it was above the cap, but I think once it's on the site, there are fewer places that are willing to accept it. It's just, it's time and money, I'm sure. Yeah. So while that was ongoing, once the soil had been removed, we started to infill the floors, and you can see this is the new concrete, gray concrete being infilled into the turbine hall shell around the perimeter, with aligning with those historic mezzanines. So the original building, the original architecture really informed the new design. We weren't building in new floors and creating our own sort of our own separate structure. It's kind of, we infilled like a ship in a bottle, essentially. And because of that, the first floor happens to have the largest floor to ceiling height. And the second floor, the mezzanine structure, it's a very tight floor to ceiling. So that became part of how we thought about organizing these workshops and the spaces within the building. The first floor became home to the metal and the wood shops, where you had the largest lengths of materials. And so you could have loading very easily off of the forecourt into the buildings there. The second floor, because it's got such low floor to ceiling height, became home to the small metals jewelry making workshop and most of the administrative offices, and where you're sitting right now, the small hall as well. And then the third floor is the grand hall, where we've seen all these soaring images, and that's where the main event space. On the boiler house side, we've got the ceramics workshop is located on the uppermost floor, so that we can have the shortest length of duct run to exhaust from the kilns, from the gas and the electric kilns. So really thinking about what was happening in each workshop, working closely with the operators of the workshops, those that were already under the Powerhouse entity, to develop a bespoke workshop program with them. We cataloged all of their equipment. We understood where power supply was needed, where they had a gas connection, where air compressors needed to be located, and what the process would be through the shop to have every single piece of equipment itemized and located with all of the connections available. So it's a really unique building in that sense, that most workshop spaces are something that's been adapted to that use and not designed for that use. Yes. Both. There's one of each. Well, I think we'll be able to see them on the tour as well. So I'm going to keep just going through. This is so we did a major masonry restoration campaign as well. I think what you're seeing here is all of the brick that had been removed from the parapets or had fallen from the parapets that was collected on the grand hall floor. So the next step after we did this load test was to begin our masonry restoration campaign. The project at this time had not been landmarked by New York City, but during construction was actually designated a New York City landmark, which is incredibly unique and meant that what they actually designated was the exterior facade of the turbine hall, the existing structure, and the design as designed in our documents that have been approved by the DOB. So it was not going back to a historic condition, it was the design condition, which is, I think, I haven't heard of a similar, yes. But the idea was that this wasn't, in our process, this wasn't a preservation project in the strict sense of that, but we wanted to keep the integrity of this industrial architecture, this infrastructural architecture. And so we weren't trying to preserve the graffiti and the brick, but we wanted to restore it, stabilize it, keep everything we could keep, but allow it to sort of take on this patina and future layers of work that's going to happen in the building, that becomes part of the building's story, so that you still have the original industrial era shown, you have this graffiti era, and now you've got it as a fabrication workshop, and all of these layers can become part of the building's architecture. This was an image of some of the exterior restoration that was happening. Most of the copings had at the roof had come off. We had missing bluestone pieces. I think most of the facade, 70% or so, needed to be repointed. There was a lot of brick patching, brick repair, coining that needed to be replaced, brick coins that needed to be replaced, cracking at the corners where there'd been rust jacking because there's steel columns within the building and then this masonry exterior envelope. And so water had infiltrated those columns and caused rust, and then that caused this buckling and bricks started to crack. And so all of that needed to be repaired and rebuilt. And then the final step to that was to do a wash down of the whole building, which you're seeing now. New windows were inset into the historic openings, which then carried around as well to the boiler house to create a whole unified structure. Here's some of the repaired facade. And then this is the boiler house structure, which, as I said, was a cast in place concrete building. It's actually 2 withes of concrete. So the interior concrete for both the boiler house and the turbine hall is this gray concrete, just out of form. But the exterior of the boiler house is a 6-inch width of red concrete. That was a study in how we would find the right pigmentation, find the right texture, so that it didn't feel like an addition, but instead integral to the building. And you can see the sort of the window openings carrying across the 2 buildings. And then this is a part of the process of retaining some of that really important historic graffiti. When you came in the building downstairs, and we'll look at this during the tour, you see there's in the lobby a lot of graffiti. There's a really important piece to us. It's the You Go Girl wall that we wanted to feature. And so you actually cross underneath this wall. But it was elevated, and so we needed to create an opening at the bottom of this large bearing wall to hold that and to install a lintel. So we inserted needle beams, and I'm hoping, yes. You can see it from the back side to install a new lintel, and now you've got a new open lobby space, because originally there had been a large masonry wall that just subdivided the space. So the whole entry process has changed from the historic building to the new building. And here's some imagery of the finished condition and some of the facade. You've got the turbine hall on the left and the boiler house on the right. And that's it. There you go.
Thank you. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're actually doing now, how we're activating the building. So as Nathan mentioned, it's been almost a year to the date since we've been here. And so this is just an exterior shot. As part of the redevelopment, the outside landscape was also redone as well. And then this will also serve part as a connection to the larger public walkway that will be developed along the canal as well. So here we are. And as Tori mentioned, this is the inside of their lobby. You all were there this morning. And then just We are hoping to open a cafe, but this also serves as our entryway and lobby and exhibition space as well. And this is the grand hall. So once we are finished here, we'll go on a tour. You'll get to see this actually in person. But we imagine this space as a space for endless possibilities of, we've had performance events, art exhibitions, fairs that will take place in this space. Maybe even weddings too, sort of harkening back to the original potential considered of weddings, but we haven't had any weddings here as yet, but anything is possible here with this site. And you can also, it's not visible in this image, but when we go down and you'll see the new commissioned graffiti piece that we did for the opening a year ago by the artist Ellery. And so this is just a shot of the outside of our building. And again, just more of the graffiti and shots. This is the mezzanine upper level of the building, of the ground hall. This is the loft area. This is in the new part of the building. And we use this space for event rentals as well and exhibitions as well. And right above it, where you see those open windows, is the print shop that looks over into the loft space. So again, so this is an image from how starting to see it activated and full of people. And since I've been here about a year, I've been really focusing, or less than a year, sorry, on how we can activate the building. So far we have the ceramic shop, which is open on the 6th floor. We have public art, which is on the 1st floor, which you'll also see. We have the print shop on the 4th floor, and still to be activated will be these small metals jewelry making, which is on the 2nd floor, which we're hoping to open shortly. We also have begun to activate textiles, and we will have a community print shop open as well. So the main things that we have going right now are, again, just ceramics, print, and public art. But this is an image from an opening event we had in September. And so you see how the space becomes really flexible as a gallery space. And this image is from our opening event. It was a performance that was held in the grand hall. So just images to see how the space is flexible and how it can be activated in different ways. Another image where this lake was intentional. Right. London ladder. Oh, okay. And then again, just other events. We've held conversation series in this space as well. And just to go back to some of our current programming, we have a monthly series where we have artists who come and are in conversations with some of the powerhouse fabricators. We had one about 2 weeks ago. We have another event coming up in July. Check out our website. Do a little plug for our programming here, but these take place here. This also acts as sometimes a gallery space. Also, when we have large events in the grand hall, this also becomes a kitchen, the catering back hall. So the space is really flexible, and the design has been sort of really intentional about how we use the space. So recently we held the fashion show. So just showing like the different use and different ways the space is being activated. And if you look up to in the right corner at the top, you can see the newly commissioned graffiti mural. Yeah, thanks. That was done for the opening last year. And so you will get to see some of works in action when we go on the tour. But this is one of our first artists in residence, Ivan Ford. He's in our print shop doing a print, and he's also, you can see his work downstairs in the lobby. He did a special print for us for an edition, and if any of you are interested in buying a print, all that will go to support programming here at Powerhouse. But he was one of our first residencies, and we will be kicking off a more formal artist in residency program, hopefully next year, where artists will get to work with our fabrication shops and our staff to create new bodies of work. And recently, this past weekend, we had over 2,000 people come through for the Black Zine Fest. We partnered with Sojourner Truth Press to host this event in the Grand Hall as well. So it's, and this is a shot, this is the first floor, our digital print lab. We have a number of printers and interesting technology that allows us to experiment with new techniques, large scale printing, and work. So this is Dennis, who is in our digital print lab. So the current labs that we have open, as I mentioned, was like the print shop, ceramics, and public art. Those are workshops that we do. We're fee for service. So we're working with artists who come in to build and produce their work. And in ceramics now we have a community print shop that's open, and we'll be opening a community print shop as well, or studio, sorry. So as we go in the tour, I don't know if we will be able to get to see all aspects of the ceramic shop, but this is a 3D printer that we have. And this is some of our staff, our fabricators who are working on a piece in the ceramic shop. And again, just another view from the print shop. This is located, again, in the northern part, the newer building. And this is our public, one of our staff and our public art, which is on the first floor. And what we've also done too is we've been working with a number of young people from 2 high schools in Brooklyn. And so these are youth who were participating in a workshop at Powerhouse. And so we're continuing to do activations on site, and we have also worked with community groups off site as well at local high schools in Brooklyn. And so this is another one of our artists in residence, Stephen Burke. He was also in conversation with Eric Shiner last week in our conversation series. He's an industrial designer who is also moving into metal and ceramics. And so he did his residency here for about 4 months earlier this year. And the space allowed him an opportunity to experiment with a new material. So yeah, that's him. And he was occupying the 5th floor studio. And again, this is the last shot of the outside of the building. So I guess now we can turn it over for questions. And what we can do is, let's take one mic. Okay. You'll do. Sure.
Let me make sure this one's on. Can you hear me on this microphone? Great. Before we open it up to questions, I just had a couple quick questions for the panelists that I was curious about, but just the bigger picture, Paul, of like why was this? Why did this even happen? You know, why was the building not demolished outright? What was the vision of Joshua Rechnitz when he purchased this building and decided to invest all of this time and money into creating the Powerhouse Arts Center?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll take a stab at it and then maybe pass it to Karen. But, you know, so when, excuse me, when Josh and family kind of first looked at the building, and Josh Rechnitz, for those who don't know the history, was also involved in proposing a velodrome in Brooklyn Bridge Park at one point. So he's been like interested in sort of community-based sorts of projects in Brooklyn for some time. And really, I think had been very involved with artists' communities and was interested in creating a kind of hive of activity for artists. And as the nonprofit started to evolve, there were a lot of meetings with individual artist groups, different fabricators, a group called Triple Canopy, all of which were about like, how do we make this not just about like private art studios, but how do we make this kind of more of a collaborative effort to kind of really bring people together? And so the arts and fabrication idea, I think, really grew out of that that effort. You know, I in a previous organization built a lot of you know, spaces for visual and performing artists, and it's true that while, you know, art studios are in desperate need, you do often have, you know, people kind of disappearing into their studios, and so the idea here really was to have it be, you know, part of a collaborative process, and also I think an acknowledgement of the fact that art making, especially now, is not, is often not about an individual artist kind of, working in isolation, but is really about a lot of different components, and different processes. So, Karen.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, like the vision of the founder was also to create a hive, a creative hive, so that where folks who worked in ceramics could experiment with textiles, and that the idea is that we would begin to see cross-pollination with art, and the facility was really interested in making art fabrication still accessible to artists in New York. That we all know the story and the pressures of real estate and the costs, and that many fabrication stores were getting, shops were getting priced out of being in New York. So one of the main tenets of Powerhouse Arts is to make art still accessible to artists.
Can the public, I guess a quick question is, can the public just come into Powerhouse Arts today? I mean, I know there's some programs where the public can.
Yes,
join
sure.
in.
So one of our first general public programs that's going to happen on June 15th, Community Day. I'm going to give a bit of a plug for that. One aspect of how the folks, the public can interact with the building. We have the conversation series as well. And so those are sort of the easiest ways. And then we're also going to be launching a series of classes, arts classes for folks who are interested. Those will happen in the fall. And there'll be a mixture of paid classes, series classes, and one shorter workshops that will be offered free for the community to participate in. So those are the easiest ways. But if you are interested in ceramics or printmaking, we will have community. Our ceramics studio is open for monthly membership. If you're interested in printmaking, we'll have one open in the fall as well.
Just to sort of piggyback on some of the earlier conversations and descriptions that Nathan, you and Paul were talking about, one of the things that I think is really, really special about Powerhouse is that it's art fabrication. And so it's keeping fabrication, the original use, industrial use of the building, of the neighborhood is maintained. And so it's not just not condos, it's still an industrial building in an industrial neighborhood. And so I really like that it's not just landmarked in terms of a building, but in terms of a use. I think that's really something special that should be appreciated.
I think if there's questions from the audience, we can open it up.
I find it fascinating, the concept. I'm looking forward to the tour. I have some practical questions for the architect. Originally, the building was populated by a small crew, right? Not that many people. Yeah, and the plumbing system was limited. When you, right, so and I see a pipe over there, was the effluent coming out into the Gowanus from the building originally?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
there
So-
was no sewer system on any of the Gowanus, so everything flows into the Gowanus still.
Just,
And sorry to interrupt, there were also intake water tunnels that ran into the basement and then lateral tunnels that ran into the.
right. So what kind of arrangements you had to make with the city connecting to the sewer system for this building, which is going to have, and also what is the heating system for the building?
It's all new systems for the building, everything. It's a whole new site, new Con Ed, we have a Con Ed plant on the roof. We have a large condenser plant on the roof. We've got VRVs. There are, I think, 65 separate exhaust systems to handle the hundreds of different pieces of equipment within these workshops, which you'll see. It's a very robust MEP design and program for the space, which we really didn't get to touch on so much in this conversation. But the MEP infrastructure, mechanical, electrical, plumbing infrastructure for the building was as much a part of the architecture as anything else, because the building's function is paramount. And so we needed workshops that were not just functional in terms of the movement of things, but also this building has become a model for how to design and build healthy workshop spaces for these industrial fabrication processes. So we worked with industrial hygienists for that. So there were a lot of, parties involved in this and a lot of conversations with DEP, with EPA. We had an environmental engineer, we had the industrial hygienist. So there was countless filings and regulatory agencies involved very closely throughout the whole process. So we have several, so it's interesting. We actually, in terms of the overall design, the workshops are set so that there is cooling, but it's the set points for everything. You know, we're improving upon the typical workshop space, you know, out of a garage or a workshop, but we've increased the set points so that we've allowed for them to be more comfortable, but not, you know, we're trying to save some energy here. When we go all electric, we are set up to do that when the electrical grid becomes something more economical and also cleaner, which it's not there yet. So I mean, are we going, we can't go to the roof, can we? Probably not. No. Yeah, the roof is great. It's the most incredible mechanical plant, and it's massive. But sadly, that's for another day.
First of all, extraordinary. I ran the kitchen and we had a similarly old building which we had to activate. We also had to repoint and a whole lot of other things. But I'm very, very interested in the reactivation and the industrial. First of all, I'm really interested that you're breaking down silos between disciplines, which is, you know, I think happening more in the world, but it's great that you set it up with that intention. I'm curious whether you have, like, just in that vein, apprenticeships, internships, the way of, yeah, could you talk about that?
Sure. So currently we do have an internship program that's in partnership with CUNY. And so we have, and we'll also be having a new set of students who are going to be starting in a couple of weeks. So we'll have 2 folks in our ceramics shop, and we'll also, for the first time, which is interesting, have folks who aren't artists, but engineers, who will be learning about how to run this building. So yeah, so we have with the high school, and in the past, before we moved into the building, we did do some internships with high school students. But right now we're going to be focusing on the older college students for internships. Yes.
Hi, I'm curious, I have 2 questions. One is your operating model. Are you like self-sustaining based on rents and events in the bid? And the second question is, do you find that there is more demand for these kind of spaces than you can provide here?
I'll start with that last question. Yes. We're still in our first year. And so we are limited by capacity. There are many people who want to partner with us to host events here. And we're doing the best that we can, but I'm sure as time goes on, that we'll be able to accommodate more with more staffing as well. And so we have an interesting model as a nonprofit. We have our earned revenue that we get from our shops. We are also, you know, do contributions, individual contributions, and we're also through grants. That's how we operate. But most of it now is, a good portion is from our earned revenue from the shops.
This building is fantastic, and to everybody, it was a fantastic job. Really good really good use of repurposing. Do you still have empty space?
No, we're quickly filling it all up.
So much for my thought.
Good morning. So happy to be here and see something come back to life in relationship to our past and the history lesson that goes with it. I'm Maria Roca from nearby Sunset Park, Francis Sunset Park. And my question goes to something that was touched on before about internships. I'm very interested in the middle school facet, area of education, where there is unfortunately a lot of disrespect for the minds of our middle schoolers, thinking that they're not capable of. 8-year-olds are quite capable, never mind middle schoolers. So in the plans going forward, or maybe something already on paper, how does this wonderful facility that exposes not only the adults, but should expose the youngsters to see what is possible for them, to come into this building, to have a conversation with this building, an ongoing conversation. So are there, my question now, are there already conversations with the Department of Education of the City of New York, budgets aside, and all of that, with the arts teachers, the science teachers, because a lot of this is science, chemistry, physics, and all that stuff is not just pretty stuff, as some people may think, to have that going on after school and over the weekends. There is, I mean, the shortage of programs throughout the city, but I'm going to stick with Southwest Brooklyn, which this is part of, to bring those children, those teachers, that sometimes, and help the teachers maybe gain CPU credit and some stipend to come in, reinforce themselves, bring their kids in with them, and make it really accessible to the public. So that's the end sort of question mark.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. And yes, that is something that we are considering doing. We have been in conversations with the DOE. We haven't yet worked with middle schools. Most of our work has been entirely with high school and college age students. But as I mentioned before, on Community Day, that's an opportunity for us to welcome in like families. So to have programming that is geared towards younger people as well. But we have a department and a director of learning, of education, and that is something that we are hoping to do. It's be able to offer professional development for teachers with the DOE, and our director is really intentional about wanting to focus on Title I schools and serving students and teachers from those communities. So that's something that's in the works. We don't have it fully established yet, but that's something that we are looking to do.
Okay, I think that's it. Oh, we have one. There are solar panels? Was that a consideration?
Not as of yet. The turbine hall, the building you're in now, we've looked at placing solar panels. And so it's been designed so that we can do so when funding is available and it makes sense.
The building directly is likely to be.
That's true.
Look at the shadows.
Yeah.
Went pretty far down.
We Whole Foods.
Everything I heard about Winter Park is that so I think everything's
The roof is fully occupied.
Yeah, just a quick question. I think I heard you say that originally in the plans it was to have larger scale fabrication on the first floor as well, but I didn't hear that that is happening. Was it changed or is it there and just
No,
didn't
it's-
get mentioned?
It's so the first floor, during design, it was the first floor of the turbine hall, the building you're in now, was planned as a metal shop in terms of the materiality, with the boiler house being a wood shop. In currently we're calling it's public art, is occupying those spaces, and also Workspace 11, which is, I guess, a tenant, which is using those same materials as allocated across the two buildings, but it's under the public art umbrella.
Yes, we are.
And I think we can definitely discuss as we take the tour, which we're really excited about. But one quick order of business coming up before the tour happens. We just wanted to do a quick acknowledgement. This is the last breakfast talk of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center this year. Last week, we had our big annual conference, which I know some of you attended. And we really wanted to acknowledge the director of the Brooklyn Waterfront Research Center, Richard. Because this is a special milestone for Richard, this week is his birthday, and yeah, I won't say what the birthday is, but Richard, do you want to say what birthday it is?
Sure, 80.
So we wanted to wish Richard a happy birthday before we head out on our tour. We've yeah, we got a cake coming up, come from the back here, and we can have cake after the tour. After the tour, you can join us for a cake. Yeah, let's start. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Richard. Happy birthday to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is a surprise, and I want to thank, while I'm thanking here, I want to thank our hosts for that. This was our first off-campus breakfast talk, and what a place, what a building. Thank you very much for letting us come and see this place, and you're now going to take us around so we could see it more. But thank you very much, and I love the way the flow of the discussion happened. And this will be on our website. It has been recorded, so anybody wants to say, you don't know what you missed, you have to send them to BWRC's website, and they will see what they missed, those who didn't. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for this. So, yes, let's get a photo.
Join us on the tour, and afterwards we can have birthday cake.